Good evening. I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Boulder Valley School District Board of Education for Tuesday, April 14th, 2015. Sandy, will you please call the roll?
Albright.
Here.
Belville.
Here.
Hannaford.
Here.
Fuqua.
Here.
Marquis. Here. Myers.
Here.
Reed.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I would like to remind all who are gathered here today, this evening, at the board table and in the audience today and on television of the mission of the Boulder Valley School District. The mission of BVSD is to create challenging, meaningful, and engaging learning opportunities so that all children thrive and are prepared for successful, civically engaged lives. The first item of business for us today is the superintendent's report. Dr. Messenger.
President Albright, members of the board, welcome. Great to have you here this evening. I have several items I'd like to share with you. First of all, at your place and in the audience, and to be distributed throughout the community this weekend through the newspaper, is our update, our annual, we call it Report to the Community. So we've been using this format for several years. I just want to note some of the standing features that we have as an overview of our budget process, and also a big thank you to our community for their incredible support with the bond in the fall, and a little bit about that building success, the work that we're going to be doing, and also an introduction to the success effect, which is the tagline we are using with our new strategic plan. So, and then of course on the back, the vision, mission, values, and goals that you approved almost 2 years ago, June of 2013. So anyway, those at your place. If you have groups or organizations you'd like to share those with, the communications office would be glad to provide you as many as you would like. So, and again, they'll be distributed throughout the community and be available in all of our schools. So that'd be an update to our community on the good work happening in the Boulder Valley School District. So, to keep building on positive, bond sales this morning, the Boulder Valley School District accepted offers for prospective underwriters for $250 million, a Series E general obligation bonds. The district's bonds carry high-grade ratings from Moody, Standard & Poor's, and also Fitch. The bonds were offered using a competitive process on the internet, and the district received 6 bids for the full amount of the issue. The best bid was submitted by Morgan Stanley at the true interest cost of 3.857%. The other 5 bidders were Citigroup, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, and Barclays Capital. The other 5 bids ranged of interest range from 3.874 to 3.994. Morgan Stanley's bid, which produces the lowest overall cost of the district, was accepted. The district's cost is now locked in, and Morgan Stanley will assume the risk associated with reselling the bonds to long-term investors. So this is the beginning. This is phase 1. This is our first sale of bonds, so we can begin our work in the phase 1 schools and continue our planning. So we're really pleased about that, and pleased with the rating this district has and the interest in our bonds, and the quick response this morning. Shelley was there and Sam was there, so thank you for joining us for that relatively brief virtual experience, but it was good. And some members of our audit committee were with us also. So just a quick update on that. We're pleased about that good work. And strategic plan work session is scheduled for a week from tonight on February 21st. I just want to remind you that it's going to be a double hitter. We're going to do a preliminary budget for an hour. Well, first hour is going to be strategic planning. The second hour is going to be preliminary budget. This is our work session week, and so you can look forward to that. A few highlights on the strategic plan is that what we promised you the last time that Dr. Pilch and I presented to you is that we would have work from Education Northwest, which we have received, and we have internally worked through it. And so what you can look forward to in the 5 focus areas that we introduced to you last time, you'll see priority action indicators for each of those areas. There'll be performance indicators, key actions, implementation indicators, and outcomes for each of those 5 areas. So we had shared with you last time the parent engagement ones. We now have them in each of the 5 areas. So we will be sending those to you in advance of the meeting, so you can take a look, because in an hour, there's a lot of ground to cover. So if you have a chance to look at those when you receive them from Sandy, that would be great. We'll also include in that evening's presentation what our recommendation is for investment in the strategic plan in the budget development process. So it'll be timely because we're talking about the preliminary budget that same evening. So I want to give a quick update on where we are with Casey Middle School. You'd asked that I would do that in my superintendent's report each meeting, so I will do that. I just want to reinforce to the community, which you know, as a school district, our top priority is to ensure a safe and healthy learning environment at Casey, and we'll continue to take the appropriate steps to reach that goal. And we believe, meaning staff and those working closely with us, that we've turned the corner on this work. It has been a long process, and it's sometimes complicated, but we feel good about where we are. So just a few of the actions that have taken place since we were last together is that we have completed the rebalancing of the air handling system in the building, and then the subsequent work following that all finished over spring break, the Saturday of spring break. And then they go back in and pressure test throughout the building to make sure that the adjustments are right, and if not, that they continue to adjust it. So that's been going on for 10 days to 2 weeks to get that correct. One of the things that we found is 60% of the rooms weren't receiving the level of fresh air that we would like to see, and what the standard is, so that adjustment was made, and 30% were actually receiving more fresh air. So that's the balancing piece, to get that right. So that's good work. And then they also found some other minor issues of fine-tuning in the mechanical system that needed to take place. We also, over spring break, took the sewer vents that are on the roof, and we clustered them together and consolidated those into a fewer number of extended vent stacks on the building, so that the gas that dissipates out of those vent pipes will be far enough above the building that when released, won't return into the operable windows or the fresh air return. So we talked about that before. That work is completed, and we believe that was what was needed. We also ran a smoke test. The city of Boulder worked with us with some different equipment. It was a more high pressure, specialized equipment that we used, and did now triple check to make sure that we don't have any breaches or breaks in the internal pipes, which we've had, as you know, some problems in the past. Those tested out without any problems. Last week, we initiated the continuous monitoring for hydrogen sulfide in accordance with the recommendations from Dr. Richard Shaughnessy, also Brad Turk with the indoor quality experts, and also Dr. Mike Van Dyke from the Colorado Health Department. They recommend that we have continuous monitoring as we go forward, and we'll have a long-term monitoring plan. And also, we plan to initiate the staff health survey, the symptom survey we've called it. We plan on that next week. Dr. Van Dyke wanted to get settled in, make sure the balancing was complete before we initiated that. Most of you were in attendance. We had a community informational meeting on April 2nd. We have since posted on the website for Casey. They have a special website now around air quality. So all of the PowerPoint presentations, the videotape of the evening, which is over an hour long, and any related materials, the reports and things that were referenced are all available to the public. We finally got those all up this week. And so we're going to continue doing this work. The symptom survey, if there's anything that comes from that indicates there's a pattern or a trend that might be other things we should be looking at, Dr. Van Dyke and his team will consider that. And so what he said in his presentation is that we're working on the best knowledge we have today. If we receive new knowledge or a different understanding, then we'll do a course adjustment and keep you informed if we do that. So that's our plan. The last thing I want to mention, as you know, because again, most of you were there, is that we had a successful negotiation session last week with the Boulder Valley Education Association under the leadership of Dr. Tina Mew. This was our second session altogether. We started the work in January. We finished it last week, and so we have a tentative agreement with the association, and they plan to take it to their membership for ratification at the end of this month, the end of April. Tentatively, we scheduled to be back on the board agenda at the next meeting following that, which would be May 12th. Just for some highlights, there were several areas we looked at. We did some language cleanup, or housekeeping we call it. We also developed 2 memorandums of understanding, reached agreement of work that will be ahead of us around workload and also time, how we use time in our school day and our school year. We made a base salary adjustment, proposed base salary adjustment, and we continue to refine the work on the salary schedule that we worked together to create 3 years ago. We also modified the process we're going to use for feedback to administration from our teachers and educators in the buildings, so some good work around that. And then we further defined the work of the labor management team. The labor management team was created 3 years ago. We just met this afternoon. 3 representatives from the association, as well as 3 from the district. And so good work has come from that group, and we needed to give ourselves some additional definitions. So that's also been modified and included in the contract. So overall, a productive day. I think we finished by 5. So thanks for all of you that gave input or were there in person and participated. So thanks. And President Albright, that would conclude my remarks. I'd be glad to answer questions on these topics or any others. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Board members, comments or questions? Tina, do you have a question?
Yeah. Can I ask a question about, in the strategic plan work session, will you be able to share some of the baseline data that was the springboard to come up with the 5 recommendations? Is that part of it within the indicator section, or will that?
It is not part of that, Tina. What the performance indicators are so we have the key actions, things that we're going to do going forward that relate to the outcomes. And then these performance indicators are ways that we would recommend that we assess our progress going forward. Now, when we start that work, we will establish baseline data if we have it. In some cases, we don't have baseline data because we're not collecting information in those areas. But we believe going forward, if we're going to accomplish the ultimate outcome or the goal, we need to have better data on that. So we had not planned to include that as a part of this presentation. So in many areas, we simply don't have good baseline data. So that is one of the charges that we have before us to establish that.
Okay. And then, can I ask a testing question?
Sure.
Okay, great. Do you know where they are today with getting the written section of the ACT included and paid for? Is that, and I just got a question about that.
Yeah,
recently.
it's been suggested, proposed for a number of years. To date, the state has not embraced that as assuming that cost. Right now, the state general fund pays for that part of the assessment, the ACT that's administered. If the students take it on our campuses, if they take it in a test center or do it a second time, it's on the student's dollar to do that. But the writing assessment is not included. I will say that there's quite a bit of conversation with all the legislation right now around revamping the state assessment system. So a lot of work going on that, as you know, in the legislature. There has been talk about expanding ACT to measure other areas, including writing, and maybe that will suffice for the high school assessment, and maybe we wouldn't have to do the freshman or sophomore. So they're trying to reduce the level of high school assessments overall, and I think that's going to happen in this session. And and I don't know that we're going to get there in this session, but there certainly has been conversation. If not the ACT, is there an assessment we could give once in high school that would be that transition to college and could cover the areas that need to be, and that would include writing, but presently, no.
Okay. And then the other thing, I had read an article about how there might be some groups looking at the allocation formula of funding in Colorado, and it kind of reminded me of
Yep.
our negotiations, because they
Conversation
were
we had,
looking
yeah.
at that too. Have you heard more about that? This was just a very shallow article, and I'm just wondering what it would look like and what the process might be and how we would engage in that conversation.
So Representative Millie Hamner has proposed a piece of legislation, and I'm not quite sure today where it is. It's in place still, that there would be a study committee, a commission that would engage in the conversation of looking at our allocation formula for the state. I would say there's been mixed reaction to that. When I was asked to weigh in, I said, sure, that seems like a good thing to do. If we're going to need to find more revenue at some point, but looking at the allocation system. So I think it's being talked about, I would say. We'll see if it gets out of the session. Okay. And if it does, then we'll look at ways we could have voice in that. Hopefully there would be opportunity.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? Questions? Jenny?
I just have a real quick question, because I had a constituent ask me today if we could get our work session topics up a little as soon as we knew what they were on the board docs or wherever we're posting that
Sure,
stuff.
we could
So-
probably go ahead and get them up, Sandy, and then we could add documents later. I mean, we know what the 2 topics are next week, so we could get those up, and we might not have the support documents, but as you know, we add those, and we remind you when we add documents. And for the public, I would just say they should check back closer today to see if information's been added. But yeah, we certainly can, the topics we generally know well in advance.
Yeah, and that, I just think that would be,
Yeah.
that would help with
Okay.
community. But anyway, thanks for your reports in the other areas.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. You're welcome.
Anything else?
Nope, that was it.
Okay. Shelley?
So I was under the impression that the meeting next week was just going to be a budget work session, not a strategic planning work session. So I just want to make sure we have plenty of time to talk about the budget. So does it need to be an hour and an hour, or?
Well, we've planned an hour presentation conversation on the strategic plan, and that will be first, and we've invited members of the steering committee to join us. I think we can capture that. I mean, we are going to come back to it, obviously. I think, we just went with, Deirdre and I met with Bill and Leslie this afternoon to plan the budget presentation. We went over the materials of what we did in a comparable work session a year ago. Certainly we won't, we'll be able to present the material and walk through it easily in that time. I think if the discussion goes longer, I guess it would be the board could choose to continue that. There isn't,
Okay.
I mean, you would determine the cutoff time. So I think, Lori, what I would suggest is that if the pleasure of the board is after an hour has passed, if they want to continue on the budget, we'll work to contain the strategic plan in the first hour. So we at least have an hour for the budget discussion. But I certainly think if you chose to, you could go longer. I mean, there's no hard stop as far as we're concerned. We'll be available.
So plan on an extra hour, maybe? I mean, it may take a while. And I would just note that even though, Bruce, you're directing that to me, that Lori, it may be, I just will say I unfortunately will not be here next week.
That's
I will
right.
be
I
out
do
of
recall
town.
that.
But Jenny will be
Jenny.
leading the meeting, and so I think we'll have a discussion about it, and, we'll just talk. We need to talk as long as it takes.
Yeah.
I mean, there's.
And certainly we
there's-
can come back to either of those two topics and
Right.
schedule those back in.
That's right. But, okay. Anyone else? Yeah? No?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, the next item on our agenda is public hearing and public participation. The board recognizes the value of public comment on issues related to the operation of the schools. To ensure that our meeting is conducted in an orderly manner, we ask the persons who address the board. Did I skip DAC? I skipped DAC, didn't I? Lisa, and I see you sitting out there. I am so sorry. So, I'm sorry. The next item on our agenda is the DAC report. And Lisa Medler, I see you out here, and we're glad you're here, and I didn't mean to rush right over you. Sorry. Welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you. So you're ready for me to go now? You
Yeah,
don't-
oh, yeah.
You don't want to, okay.
Right? Thanks.
Well, great, thanks. So we have two items on the agenda, one of which you should have a memo for, and that is the DAC's recommendation on district spending priorities. So hopefully you've had a chance to at least glance at that. That top portion, we just are pointing out this is what's expected in statute. So we're trying to fulfill our obligation there. And essentially, we've tried to keep the recommendations brief and pretty clear for you, figuring that you didn't need a lot of detail and a lot of advice giving. So hopefully this is stuff that you would already naturally be doing, but this at least gives you some indication after about a year's worth of study where the DAC is landing and what the DAC is seeing as priorities. So one, obviously that alignment with the strategic plan, there's been a lot of effort that's gone into that. DAC is totally supportive and feels like alignment with that is paramount. So definitely seeing that as a priority. Also wanting to point out that as the DAC has looked at data over time, there's certain populations that just have trends that are somewhat concerning and continue to be concerning over time. In particular, English language learners and students in poverty are two particular populations. So anything that can be done there to ensure that they are being paid attention to, we just want to keep that in the conversation. And then finally, the third one, we really tried to reach out to individual schools and get a sense of, well, what are individual schools and SACs, the School Accountability Committees, saying that they need. So that is what the attachment is referencing. So as DAC representatives went back and talked with their SACs, and also keep in mind, not all schools are represented on the DAC currently, not that they aren't welcome, they just don't have a representative. So we had about 15 schools get back to us, and that's what this tally represents. I think what's noteworthy are the ones that rise to the top, and we did try and separate it into secondary and elementary because there's a lot more elementary schools than secondary schools, middle school and high schools. So you can see the numbers there on page 2 at the top. But what came out across just loud and clear is the need for counselors, social workers, that socio-emotional supports. I think with past cuts, that's one of the areas that probably suffered the most, and folks are now really seeing the need for that. So I felt a need to at least call that out. Not that it was like a voting or like a scientific study, but more just it came up enough that the DAC felt like it was worth highlighting. The next two being reducing class size. Class sizes have continued to increase. And then really just trying to give schools the flexibility to have dollars available to them so that they can meet their own unique needs. Some of them might be quite similar, but they do need some flexibility. And again, this was not just coming from principals, this was coming from SAC, so parent representatives, teacher representatives as well, okay? So that's at least a description of the memo. Should I, if you have questions on that, or should I just keep going, plowing ahead?
Might be better to have, if you have a question, maybe we could do it now on this topic? Okay.
So
Jenny.
I do have a question. So I just wanted to check and see if you see, you made three separate recommendations for funding. And thank you for your work, by the way, on this. It's always good to get input from the people who are, the parents and teachers who work on our SACs. Do you see the other two, the two bullets, at-risk populations and individual school needs, do you see those aligning with the strategic plan at all, or do you see them as separate items?
That's a great question. I think, we are rather acquainted with the strategic plan. Bruce and Deirdre have come in several times and have kept us apprised as well. I think we don't have as good a sense of what some of those detailed action plans are, and so I think we just weren't sure and felt strongly enough that we needed to put them in there as priorities in case they were not coming out as loud and clear.
Okay.
So it's, we could have kept it at the first bullet, but I think people felt strongly enough about those other ones
To
that they needed to be
separate
put in
them.
there.
Okay, well,
So
thanks.
that's a
Yeah,
good
I appreciate
question.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, next part.
I'm going to keep going.
Keep going,
So
thank
this
you.
is still kind of attached to the next one. I just wanted to point out that the DAC also, there's a memo attached to the Unified Improvement Plan, which is in the consent items,
Yeah.
on the DAC recommendations for the Unified Improvement Planning process. So you'll see a couple bullets attached to that. So I just wanted to point that out, that, again, that's another statutory obligation or responsibility of the DAC, and so that's where that is sitting. It's really brief, no recommendations for this current UIP. It's really just moving forward, some recommendations the DAC had, and that is, again, a theme, aligning the improvement plan with the strategic plan as much as possible. And then the next one, just a request that the DAC get pulled in much sooner to that process so that the DAC can have time to really dig in and give actionable advice rather than at the last minute. So that was it on that. So I just wanted to point that out.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so then the other item that we have on the agenda is around a special project. When the DAC exec had met with you earlier in the year, we had talked about some additional special projects, and one of the ones that came out as a clear request from the board was reaching out to parents and getting some feedback on assessments, essentially, and their feelings on assessments. I didn't realize that you guys would know that so much needed to be done. So the DAC has been at least putting together a survey and coming up with a strategy to reach out to parents. So we do at least have a draft of that survey. We're working with district staff now to get that released. Simple things like distribution become difficult when you're talking about parents and how to actually get to parents in a representative group. So we're working out the details on that, but definitely wanted to assure you that the DAC has appointed a smaller group. So Laura Hale, who's one of the other DAC exec, and I have been leading that group, and then a representative group of elementary representatives and secondary representatives have put it together. So really, we've tried to keep it short. The questions really focus on trying to get a sense of, are you getting the results? Do they make sense? Frequency, are your students or children experiencing anxiety, and then also just trying to get some of their stories, whether negative or positive. So just wanted to let you know that that is coming. It just takes a while. And I think we're hoping to have something for you once we get results. So we just wanted to at least keep you posted on that project. Okay?
Great. Thank you. Board members. Sam?
Say thanks for the work, and I probably share your frustration with only hearing from 15 schools out of our 50 plus. I think it's a decent sample size, and I think it's definitely worthwhile, but I was hoping there was some way to reach out to the SACs, even if they don't have a DAC rep, so that we could hear from everybody. I know it's just a matter of parents' time and availability, but would hope we could hear from more schools, as I'm sure you hope that as well. And I don't know if you guys have any strategy for that, but thanks for the work, and I do find it useful.
And to clarify, that's on the spending priorities recommendations. Okay, yep, yep. I think, just if I may, I think the DAC was really happy with the process that we set up for collecting this information and feeling like we engaged in a real way with the schools that we haven't always been able to in the past. So we want to continue it. Just know that we've had a lot of conversation about concerns about not full representation. So I think that's going to be an ongoing way, or an ongoing problem to resolve. And I think probably some further focus could be put on, okay, so if folks are not able to make the meetings, how do we actually reach out in a way to make it more meaningful when we're giving you guys recommendations? So thank you for that comment.
Yeah, and I don't want that to sound like a complaint or anything. I'm very grateful for the work you guys are doing. Yeah, just
Thank
hope
you.
we can
I will
get
take
to
that
every
back,
school. Yeah.
and I will share that
Yeah.
appreciation, yes.
Thanks. Tina?
Thanks also for all the work you're doing. For the assessment survey, are you looking to sample most parents or just do a sampling? To survey most parents or do a sampling of parents?
So I think the DAC's hope is to get it out and make it available to all parents. Just because it just seemed, why would we want to exclude anyone? And I realize there's scientific reasons why you might want to do sampling, but I think it's a matter of reaching out, especially to those schools that maybe are not as represented on the DAC and really talking it through with them. So again, that's where we're working with the district to come up with the best way to get the word out, and maybe even attend some other groups, the special ed group, what have you, to kind of get the word out as well, and maybe not just rely on schools to get the word out. So that is definitely the hope.
Shelley?
I just want to thank you too, Lisa. Tom and I especially know how much work you've gone through to get to this point. And I just want to remind the board that we are, under state law, we are obligated to consider DAC's recommendations regarding budget priorities. So we will be taking this into consideration next week. And I think the meeting's at 5 o'clock on April 21st. So we, of course, invite all of DAC to join us at the work session as we deliberate on budget priorities. So thank you very much for giving us some guidance from the group. Thanks.
Okay, anyone else? Jenny?
So thanks for taking on I'll be very interested to see the results you get on the parent feedback on the assessments. I think that should be really interesting. And you said something that I just wanted to support you on, which is reaching out to special populations, because I've actually gotten it's not representative, but that's another thing I've gotten feedback on from a constituent, is the way that the testing schedule affects special ed students. So so I think that's a really good place to pick up additional information. I'd just be interested to know whether that's a one-off comment, or whether other people have
Right.
feedback about
Okay.
the schedule.
Thanks.
I'll express my thanks as well for the work that you're doing, and that other members from the schools are doing. I know it's a lot of work. It's interesting work on the one hand, because it's important work for schools and people who do care about it. But thank you for the extra work that it takes to analyze this and pull it together. I'm especially grateful that you're working out with parents as well. because that's, we represent the community as well as the educational system, and so it's important to hear from parents. So thank you for doing that. And I bet it's interesting and probably fun when you start talking with parents about what their experiences are with the amount of testing that we're dealing with. And you're a perfect person to be doing that,
Oh.
given
Wow,
your
I'm
interest
going
in
to come more
testing.
often. You guys are so nice and thankful.
You can come. Come next week. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. We'll see you next time.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. Now I'll start this over again. So the next item on our agenda is public hearing and public participation. The board recognizes the value of public comment on issues related to the operation of the schools. To ensure that our meeting is conducted in an orderly manner, we ask the persons who address the board, 1, confine your comments to matters that are germane to the business of the school district. Speakers on agenda items will be heard first, followed by those speaking on non-agenda items. And today we only have non-agenda items. Please limit your presentation to 2 minutes. If we go over, which we won't today, public comment will continue at the end of the meeting. Recognize that students often attend or view our meetings. Speakers' remarks, therefore, should be suitable for an audience that includes kindergarten through 12th grade students. The board president may interrupt, warn, or terminate a participant's statement that is unrelated to the business of the district or inappropriate for K-12 students. There's a lighting system on the podium. It starts at green when your 2 minutes starts, turns yellow when you have 30 seconds remaining, and it turns red at the end. When the light turns red, please wrap up your comments so that we can proceed with the rest of our meeting. So we have 3 speakers tonight. They are Bill Hussey, Dr. Eric McCarty, and John Sullivan. So Mr. Hussey, please, if you are here in the audience, welcome. Thank you for coming to the school board and for talking with us.
Good evening. As you know, my name is Bill Hussey. I'm a parent of a Boulder High School freshman student athlete and a coach and athletic director during the past 20 years in California and Colorado. I'm here to talk about the decline in full-time head coaches and the impacts that is having on our students. As of today, Boulder High School will have no full-time head coaches in the major sports next year. The link between the high school coach and the academic community is becoming weaker as the number of head coaches who actually teach is dwindling. We are losing the role of model coaches and, just as importantly, the teacher of life lessons. If head coaches are on the campus for only 2 hours of practice time, they are removed from guiding and supporting their athletes through the maze of teenager challenges throughout the school year. The National Federation of State High School Associations review of literature on the influence of sports participation and academic achievement is clear. Whether it's building character, handling failure, or learning discipline, participating in sports establishes critical skills for success. We understand the tension between academic achievement and budgets that have put a squeeze on athletics. However, the time has come to address what is being lost not only in our hallways, but also in our arenas. In closing, there are a few questions I would like to share with you. Can BVSD allocate full-time PE positions at our high schools to head coaches of the major high school sports so they can hold full-time positions? Can BVSD make high school athletic department budgets accessible to the public to allow for comparative studies on how some achieve success and others do not? Can BVSD form a working group to look at the key characteristics and criteria for achieving success in hiring successful athletic directors and coaches? We hope to rally parents, teachers, coaches, and players to attend a future Board of Education meeting to speak to directly about the loss of full-time head coaches on high school athletic programs. Thank you. I have a copy for the board.
That'd be great. If you could come over here. Thank you for your comments. Dr. Eric McCarty. Welcome. We're glad you're here. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Board, Superintendent, Deputy Superintendent, and thank you for the time that you guys put into all this. Really appreciate that. I'm Eric McCarty, parent of 4 children, either currently or previously in BVSD. I work in the community and at the University as an orthopedic surgeon and the Chief of Sports Medicine for the University of Colorado School of Medicine. I'm a byproduct of BVSD. Went through the system growing up in Boulder. My experience in BVSD and athletics helped shape me to who I am today. My concern is that the district is de-emphasizing the role of athletics. May I outline why athletics are important? 50 to 60% of student population is involved in athletics. It's important for academics. Studies have shown that student athletes have a higher GPA and miss less school than their counterparts. It's important for teamwork, life skills, time management, character, and mentorship. And this mentorship is provided by coaches. I've seen an effort, particularly at Boulder High, to separate coaching from teaching. The current administration is saying that coaches are not necessary in the building. That is the wrong message. My relationship with coaches were some of the most important I had in my formative years growing up in Boulder. I still communicate with my former football and track coaches to this very day from 30 years ago. Coaches are significant role models. Having a coach in the school provides continuity, accessibility, communication, mentoring, and accountability. And that accountability is critical nowadays for these kids going through the school. Coaches, by nature, are teachers, and their role should not be underestimated. I ask you this question: why would the district want any school to be at a disadvantage? Fairview has 6 head coaches in this school. Boulder, after this year, will have no of the primary head coaches at the primary sports, just 1, and that's with girls golf. Broomfield has 9 head coaches, 17 assistant coaches. Why put a school such as Boulder High that is already at a socioeconomic disadvantage to more of a disadvantage? Why take away role models and accountability from the kids that need it most? Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
And you don't want my copy. It's handwritten.
Thank you. Our final speaker for today is John Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, welcome. Thank you for coming this evening.
Thank you for hearing me, Dr. Albright. I also have 2 kids in the Boulder Valley schools. They've been there all their young lives. One will graduate in 2015, this year, the other in 2017. And in reviewing the BVSD 2014-15 budget to see what's been happening to the athletics fund, I noted that the budget states that 56% of total high school students participate in athletics district-wide. There's a section in the budget called Connecting Budgets to Goals. Under goal number 1, it states that interscholastic and intramural athletics engage and retain students in school. I agree with this statement. But despite this statement, the budget numbers indicate that the total athletic fund has decreased 4.5% from a high of $3,166,000 in 2010-2011 to $3,030,000 in the 2014-15 budget. As proposed, the 2014-15 budget allocated $3,174,000 to the athletics funds, which is slightly higher than the 2010-2011 number. This included a transfer from the general fund in the amount of $1,954,000, which was 61.5% of the athletics fund. But in the revised budget, the amount of this transfer from the fund decreased $144,000 to $1,830,000, a 6.5% decrease. And the reason I started looking at these numbers is because I was told by the interim principal at my kid's high school that the head football coach was being dismissed because of budget cuts. When I questioned him about this, he reiterated it. Here's what I'd like to say in conclusion. I am a parent and a taxpayer in this district, and I support high school athletics. Having coaches on the campus furthers goal number 1 of engaging and retaining students in the schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. And thank you all for coming. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is board communication. Board members. Shelley.
I want to thank all 3 of you for coming forward to discuss this issue, which is near and dear to my heart, and I think the board knows this. I've been talking about this kind of thing for over 3 years. And I'd say, I think my kids, between the 2 of them, have played 7 sports. in high school. So I've seen the range of coaches, I've seen the, range of athletic directors, and I hear what they're saying. I hear that our approach to athletics across the district is not consistent with what we know from the research about how important it is. And it's true that 60% of our kids play sports. So I feel as if we need to be more consistent in our approach with athletics across all the schools. Boulder High certainly does seem to be at a disadvantage, but I certainly don't think that's purposeful. I think it's the result of our own inconsistency at the district. And I think what I would like to propose is that we take this issue very seriously and that we even have a work session in upcoming weeks or months to discuss what we're trying to accomplish with athletics in this district, what our goal is, and how it's consistent with our strategic plan, or how we need to highlight it as part of our strategic plan, because I know what this has done for my kids, and they know what this has done for their kids. And my daughter to this day says that everything that was important that she learned in high school, she learned from sports. That now she's off in college and since she's in classes and she's learning more stuff, but she doesn't remember really the stuff she learned in high school. She remembers the lessons she had as an athlete and the discipline she learned and the leadership qualities, and my son as well. So I just, I brought this up before, but I don't want to let it go this time. I think it's time for us to look at this and make sure that we're on the right path, make sure we're allocating the resources it requires, make sure that we're clear about what our objectives are. And if that requires surveying parents and staff and students at all of our major high schools and finding out how they feel about what's going on in their school, then I think it's time that we did that. So I want to make that recommendation. And thank you very much for taking time out to come tonight. And Dr. McCarty, I don't know if I ever thanked you, but thank you for speaking at the commencement ceremony last year at Boulder High School. You gave a great talk. We very much appreciate your, the community contributions you've made. And, Mr. Hussey, I happen to know that you're chairperson of the Positive Coaching Alliance in Colorado, and our schools have greatly benefited from PCA. I think it's been a big help to our coaches and to our parents, so thank you very much for that. And I just can't thank you enough for bringing this issue forward.
Thanks. Any other comments, board members? Well, I would just say thank you for coming. I think you've raised some interesting issues and important issues. I guess I would say, Bruce, probably we should take a look at the questions that have been raised. You have one written document to look at with some questions that, and I think given Shelley's interest, I don't know that we've been asked any questions here for tonight, especially.
There were some questions from the first speaker, I believe.
Right.
Which I'd be glad we can address it in agenda setting. I think it'd be appropriate. That's where we do that.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right.
Could I,
Jenny?
I may have other comments in a minute, but I would say that if we do address it, it might be appropriate to address just extracurriculars in general, because, I think we know that it's not just sports, but extracurriculars in general that help contribute to the quality of the high school experience for many of our students.
Okay. Other comments? All right. I have, under board communications, something personal for me. And it has to do with our meeting from last week. And I'm going to just read this. I regret my vote at the last board meeting where I voted with the majority of my colleagues to direct specific actions with regard to Casey Middle School. In that meeting, I was given a motion and asked to discuss it and vote on it, and I just feel it was unfortunate that it was so rushed. If we had had the motion prior to the meeting, I believe that we could have had a more productive discussion and a better outcome. The procedures that we generally follow are to bring an item forward and to discuss it as an information item or as a study item through agenda setting, and to bring it forward at the following meeting for a vote. And I think that we should maintain that practice except in extraordinary circumstances. In this case, we would have had time to clarify some of the suggestions that were put forward. One of the issues that was confusing was a statement that we should issue a student survey. And it turns out that the state public health department has not recommended that we do a survey. So it was sort of in the understanding that it was a little confusing about should we do it or shouldn't we, and being asked to make a decision that quickly was difficult. It was also suggested that the public health department had recommended continuous monitoring. In subsequent emails, we've learned that this is not the recommendation, and I just think that sometimes in the conversation, we may miss what some of the meeting is and what the advice is that we're getting. If we're not rushed, we'll have a better shot at really understanding what's happening. At this point, I think we should be following the advice of the experts. My point is not to criticize our actions and my vote, but instead to say that we need to act in a very deliberative way. We need to trust this process, and we need enough time to clarify some of these issues. With regard to Casey, I am pleased with the efforts that the staff has made, which are to provide more thorough and timely communication, to continue to look for and respond to any evidence of health issues, to ensure that the building is operating properly through monitoring as directed by the air quality experts who are working with us. If that happens, we can turn our attention to other issues. My goal for Casey, and I'm sure it's shared by every single one of us in this room, is a building that is free of air quality issues and that provides a safe, comfortable environment for students and staff. My goal for this board is to have spirited, engaged discussions about issues of importance to our community. We have some important upcoming discussions coming, both in terms of the budget and the strategic plan. I'm quite sure that there will be different points of view on those two issues and more. And I also want to make sure that we have a chance to discuss those views in a thoughtful and respectful manner. I have complete confidence in all of us to do that. But I think it's important that we allocate time and respect and engage in spirited conversation. So that's where I hope we go from here forward. But I regret my vote, and but I'm not asking for to, what's the word? Rescind that motion. We'll live with that motion, but I regret it. So, and other than that, I have no other comments under board communication. Anyone else? Sam?
Well, first of all, I appreciated the tour that Lori and I took of Casey. I think it was the day before the community meeting. Mike Cuskelly, our head of maintenance, gave a very thorough overview of the methodical approach that his staff had taken to resolving the multiple issues that had come up at Casey over time, and the air quality in the building felt very good that day. We toured it, and so I appreciate our ongoing efforts there. Also want to thank Principal Jeff Miller, who hosted Ginny and Tina and I at Netherland Elementary School for an informative visit on a true community school, and the principal lives like right next door to it. Are very nearby, and you know, the challenges that they face with some declining enrollment and the somewhat unique demographics of their mountain community. I missed the subsequent visit to the middle and high school, so I'll leave it to Jenny and Tina to discuss that if they like. And also I want to acknowledge and mourn the passing of Bob Chadwick, who while we were being ably facilitated by Diane Seehauer, his colleague, he was dying, and he passed away, I think, late last week. And you know, I just want to acknowledge his great benefit to our district. You know, I think of him as like a Johnny Appleseed of consensus, sowing those seeds, and they've certainly borne fruit here and many other places around the country, and that's a terrific legacy. So, rest in peace, Bob.
Anyone else? Jenny?
Well, first of all, Lori, I'd like to thank you for your remarks. I couldn't agree more, and I can't really add anything to them. I thought it was really well said. And then I'd like to thank you for remembering Bob. I think that was really a good thing to do. I went on the tour with Tina at the high school as well as the elementary school, and I really enjoyed the tour of Netherland High School. We have Panther T-shirts now, which you missed out on. And oh, okay. So, but I would like to congratulate staff because they do face some unique, some challenges that are not unique to our state, but are unique to our district as far as the rural nature, the sort of semi-rural nature of that community. And it's just a small school, so that it's harder for them to offer the same kinds of programs that we offer at our larger comprehensive high schools, but the students up there want those programs and the parents want those programs for their students. So they're doing some really creative work with distance learning. They're partnering with Monarch High School so that students can stay at Netherland High School and attend the classes by something like Skype, I suppose, but sort of remotely. And I have high hopes for that for them for next year, so that students at Netherland High School can offer, I think this is mostly for advanced classes. I had that impression, and that so that students at Netherland High School will be able to access the same, or many of the same advanced classes that our students down here can. So that was a really informative trip, and I'd been to Netherland High School once or twice, but I hadn't been to Netherland Elementary, so I'm glad I made the trip. And then I'd like to give a shout out to Emerald Elementary. I was able to drop in on a field trip to the fire station with the second graders this afternoon. I think that that's sort of a great example. One of the things we've talked about in our strategic planning process is the importance of community partnerships, and what could be a better community partnership than, you know, students, you know, trotting over to the fire department to meet the local firefighters. And I had never gotten a field trip like that when I was in second grade. I have to say I'm a little bitter, but now I've been able to see what goes on and what they pack in their fire engines and ambulances, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you for inviting me, Emerald Elementary.
Tom?
So I'd just like to add some to your discussion about board norms. I think I agree with you for sure that we need spirited discussions. I think we need open information. However, if board members aren't provided that information, nor are agenda items put on the agenda, we don't have an opportunity to discuss them. So if we want to have open discussions around the board table, let's get the agenda items on when they're requested. Shelley's requested some tonight. Let's get those on. Let's talk about them so we can talk about ahead of time. But when information is not provided, nor are agenda items as requested put on the agenda, there's not much of a choice than to do something differently. So let's all follow that, and I think we'll all be a lot happier.
Board members? Sam? Yeah.
I support Shelley in calling for some kind of discussion or work session to review athletics in the district, and like to hone in on the specific questions and what kind of information we want, but I think it's time to talk about it. So I just wanted to add my voice of support for that in a general way. I appreciate the guys coming out to share their concerns tonight.
Yeah, good. Anyone else? Lisa, Shelley? Okay.
I attended the the Casey Working Group last week, I guess it was. And I just wanted to update you. It's the sort of group, I guess, at Casey that's meant to channel communications from the district to the Casey population, I guess is kind of their charge. And it was fairly uneventful. I think there were far more staff than there were parents there. And I think the only request from the parents was that whatever information about events that might be happening in the school occur, that the parents get that information at the same time that the school gets it, so that everyone's on the same page. And I think they worked out some Google Docs solution or something so that they can do that. I'm not sure exactly where that ended up. But I did want to say to you, Bruce, that you know, the same facilitator was there that did the big Casey meeting on April 2nd, and it was completely unnecessary. I mean, there was so few parents there and so many staff that a facilitator was just, you know, not needed at all. So I would suggest that we save our money. You know, it really wasn't needed. So, yeah, I don't know when they're meeting again. It feels to me like things have calmed down. I think everybody's waiting to find out whether the fixes are working. I hope they are. I hope that there's no more broccoli scares. You know, I hope that this is under control. And you know, I support the parents' request at that meeting that information get channeled to the parents as quickly as possible about events at the school, so that their heightened awareness and interest in this is addressed immediately, so that we don't have more issues. So.
Anyone else? Board communication? Okay, all right. The next item on our agenda are two items under information items. And the first one is the 2015 legislative update. So, Bruce, where are we?
Well, so we're nearly the end of the session, and on the education front, I think there's probably a little level of disappointment going on among all of us that are following this closely. As in every session, the legislators have had a lot to worry about and work on, and obviously a different political construct than we've had the recent sessions. But, you know, I think given the level of spending going on in the state of Colorado and the robust economy we are enjoying, to see fairly flat funding other than cost of living adjustment and growth proposed in the School Finance Act is just a disappointment. The governor proposed $200 million of additional funding beyond that, and the JBC removed it, and they wound up putting $25 million back in, and so that's what was put into play today. With the School Finance Act, we're going to continue to encourage our elected officials to consider reprioritization of some of their decisions around expenditures and move more dollars into public schools across the state. So I'd say until the gavel rings, we are not done. So we're going to continue to work. One of the topics that's going on pretty actively right now is the notable increase in assessed valuation of property throughout the state and the impact that will have on the state education fund and going forward. So we will argue that money should come from the state education fund, at least on a one-time basis. And they were resistant to honor the governor's recommendation, JBC was. We think that was an appropriate recommendation, and we hope the legislature, before they break for the session, will reconsider that. So on school finance, it's where we are today. We've got a couple weeks left. We're going to keep working on that. So school assessment, kind of the same. They're struggling a lot to figure out a bipartisan bill that the governor won't veto that will reduce the overall level of assessment in the state. I would say maybe the only thing they really agree on so far is there ought to be less assessment at the high school level, and that senior test was probably a bad idea. I think they're with us on that. So, but they really are struggling getting a package together that would at least meet our expectations in our legislative platform. So the Denver area superintendents have been working on this. We've got a position statement, and we're trying to reach agreement on that position statement. I think we're close, and we'll deliver that to our respective legislators. And really what it calls for is looking to the federal standards as a place to continue the conversation, and whatever we do in high school really ought to be tied to what we talked about earlier, the ACT, so that more comprehensive a notion around the ACT. So anyway, good discussion going on around it. We're just hopeful that they are able to reach some compromise on this and get it through. The Senate Republicans are clearly at a place that's way more aggressive on the elimination reduction of student assessment than are the Democrats right now, and where the governor is. So that's the tension that's there. So as you know, we had the House Bill 1202 task force that made their recommendations going into the session, and the piece of legislation that kind of carried those recommendations forward wasn't very well received because folks didn't feel like it was aggressive enough in the reduction. So a lot of other language has been introduced as a part of that to suspend or eliminate the tie between student achievement and teacher evaluation, which is in 191. So that's being floated around, so, or at least suspending it. The notion of giving a pass to school districts around accreditation this year and maybe beyond until we get this figured out, because clearly it's going to be pretty confusing around what's really going on for student assessment with low participation rate or an imbalance in the demographics taking the assessment, which is clearly the state going on in the state right now. So anyway, a lot of issues around student assessment that are not yet resolved. The other piece of legislation that you read about, I'm sure in the media the last few days, is this liability that school districts might experience, an increased level of liability around violence that might occur on student campuses. So it kind of singled out as public education as opposed to other public agencies like university systems or others. So this is tied to a really unfortunate situation where a student was shot at in the Littleton School District last year, and I'm sure have followed this in the media, and the parents of that young woman who was shot and died are very involved in this discussion. So we're hoping that we can work with our legislators to find a balance in this piece of legislation because clearly we understand their desire for more transparency on information, and yet this may not be the best solution around that. Then I'll conclude my remarks, President Albright, by just commenting on the student data privacy. Several of us had a chance to meet with Congressman Polis a week or two ago on this issue at the federal level. We are supportive of the work he's doing there. We think there's good progress going on at the federal level. What Congressman Polis said in that session was that he really believes there's a role for Congress in this, with particularly the big companies, around those kind of privacy protections. But he also thinks there's a place for each state to figure this out as well, and eventually they'll complement each other. He believes in experiment with some things. So Senate Bill 173 is the state legislation that addresses this issue, and I've mentioned before, Andrew Moore, our Chief Information Officer, has been very involved at the state level, will testify in hearing tomorrow. So we appreciate Andrew's work with this, and again, it's trying to thread this needle of giving appropriate levels of protections and yet not creating too large of a burden on families or school districts. And we think we're in the ballpark there. So a lot of interest in that topic, and that's actually been one of our more productive pieces of legislation, we think, as far as moving it forward in kind of a constructive way. So anyway, we're close to the end of the session. We still have some work to do, and some of us are working at it. We've got a great team from BVSD, including members of the board, our lobbyists, under Briggs's leadership, continuing to communicate on a daily basis. So I'll conclude my remarks there. I'd be glad to answer any questions, and there might be other board members who have comments as well.
Dana? Yeah.
Have you heard anything about budget punishments at the federal level for a lack of participation on assessments? So I know the state is is more flexible there, but what have you heard about?
Yeah, you're right. The state, to start there, the state has been really wrestling with this, and I would just say generally more flexible. I think this threat from the U.S. Department of Education to all states whose participation rate is below 95% is real. When Dr. Pilch and I met with Commissioner Hammond and his deputy several months ago now, this was very present in the conversation. They were worried because of correspondence they'd received and how that might affect school funding across the state. I will tell you, I've not received, really since that informal conversation with Robert Hammond, I've not received anything formal from Robert's office, the commissioner's office, or other sources. I mean, I read probably the same education articles that you do around the country, but not anything formal. My guess is, because this is kind of a significant issue in multiple states, that this is something that Secretary of Education Duncan at the federal level and the U.S. Department of Education is wrestling with as well, because clearly it would be significant if they act on that, not just for Colorado, but for many states. But nothing new or more recent than what I've shared before. But clearly, if we receive correspondence, I'll keep you apprised. I would guess if we do, it'll come from the commissioner.
Shelley? Aye.
I have a question about, I emailed you earlier about this State Board of Health's recommendation about, I guess it's an offer on their part to school districts to channel parental vaccine information through the Department of Health as opposed to through the schools, right? So for those of you who aren't following this, the State Board of Health is recommending that for parents who want to be, well, for parents who either vaccinate or don't want to vaccinate, that they, instead of giving that information to the schools, they would direct it to the Department of Health, who would then enter it into the Colorado information system on this, that holds this data. So the frequency of how often a parent would need to do that, they're suggesting that be increased. So right now, if you're a parent and you want to opt out of vaccines, you can do that like in kindergarten and go all the way through 12th grade, because the district assumes that if you wanted to in kindergarten, you still do all the way through. And so there's not this requirement that you file every year for that exemption. But now the state Board of Health is recommending that parents do that they file every year to keep their file up to date. And because the district has said, that's basically an unfunded mandate, right? It's going to be expensive to keep track of all these forms and get them in the system. And BDSD has stood up and said that, that it's going to cost us something and we're not getting reimbursed for that. I'm not sure why there wasn't a fiscal note on that, because it is definitely going to cost the district something. So, but despite that, the State Board of Health has that offer out there. And so, my question is, I don't understand how that is okay in terms of FERPA rules. I mean, the state law, as I understand it, is that schools collect that information. That is the law. And the law doesn't change because the State Board of Health wants to increase the frequency and offers to collect that data. So I just want and correct me if I'm wrong, it's just my understanding of it. I don't think the district should be participating in that, because I think it's a violation of FERPA, because there needs to be parental consent before that kind of information is released. And the law requires that the district get that consent, not the state health department. So I think we need to look into that before we decide to go full bore with that recommendation. So I don't know. Could you look into that and get back to me and let me know if we're good?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Shelley. So as Shelley indicated, we had indicated concern to the State Board of Health about this burden that it would place on this annual resurveying or confirmation of one's position around immunization. So what I don't know today, but we'll follow up, is exactly where we are with the state data collection. And mostly that data previously has been collected in a non-identifiable information for children. So it was more of a data collection, by community, by school district, by school, but not to the degree that Shelley described. So I'll just need to follow up and see. I'm guessing they may have thought to go in that direction if that's where they're heading, because of some concern that we expressed and others about the burden it would place on local districts to continue to reach back out to families over and over again. And we're just not staffed to do that. So that was the concern we had expressed.
Yeah, and I just think we need to point out to them that this is, I think, a violation of FERPA, and that no district should really be able to do this. I
Transfer
don't
that
think.
data.
Yeah.
So we'll follow up.
Any further discussion or questions legislative? Jenny?
So, on the board, it's Region 5, CASB's Region 5 Day at the Capitol tomorrow. I don't know if anybody else is going. I'm planning to be there. But I could use some advice about if I'm able to talk to my legislator, what I should suggest, because you suggested that perhaps I think I heard you say that the state could be taking money out of the education fund, and that would be a fiscally responsible thing to do, we think. So I just could use some advice about.
Well, that's probably the most flexible source, and I think Jane would, the lobbyist for CASB would reinforce that. I think it's, given where we are now, that's probably the source that could still be tapped. I think the worry that the governor's office, although he proposed it, the governor's office and others had, is that, clearly we could still balance the budget and do that. I think the worry is where we'd be in subsequent years, and what we're suggesting is there's evidence that could be fairly easily backfilled. But I think Jane could give you some talking points on that. But I think that, given where we are in the session, is probably, they could also do some reallocation of other commitments, but I think we believe the State Education Fund is probably the place to, get upwards of 100 million plus instead of 25 million. So there's talk, we understand today, that that's a possibility, that's at play. So I would just encourage you, I'm sure they'll brief you in the morning, but that's probably our best source. Unless, there's still all of this conversation that's going on about getting some of the fees and collections that are under the Tabor restrictions of Tabor to get them, the hospital fee and the severance tax, but all of those are in a longer timeline. So one could argue we can get there, so we can take the state education fund, we can backfill it a year from now. I think that those are the conversations that are probably going on right now, that we're still hopeful that they can find some additional resources.
Well, I would like to say that I think they ought to go back on. I think they ought to do whatever it takes to fund. I'm preaching to the choir, I know, but I am just shocked and appalled that that the state legislature feels like it has any business making any commitments to anybody about anything without paying down their Amendment 23 obligations. And so I'm really very disappointed in the legislators, which would include our legislative delegation, which I haven't heard stepping up to do anything about this. And then I would also like to say, and the one thing that our legislative delegation has been active on is this is it the
liability?
The liability issue. Thank you. Which they have pushed very hard, and I just feel like that's a zero I mean, I think we don't realize. I mean, it sounds like, well, maybe, I mean, that we should be more responsible and protect the safety of our children, which of course we should. It's our primary concern. But I believe this is a piece of zero tolerance legislation, which I think we worked pretty hard to get away from in the last couple of legislative sessions, because I think that the only reasonable response to this kind of legislation is if we're going to be liable if there's an incident of violence on our campuses, the only reasonable response is to just expel students who show any tendency towards that at all and not take individual circumstances into account. I don't think we'll have any choice. And I cannot believe that our state legislature thinks that zero tolerance attitude is good for kids, or good for schools, or good for our society. And I'm really disappointed in that as well.
Thank you, Jenny. I agree.
There's always comments about the legislature, and it's an interesting time. So, Bruce, thank you for keeping us up to date on what's happening at the legislature and, just keeping us posted on what we can do. Any of us who can contact our legislators about issues, I think it's important to do that. And we're elected. We represent the same community that they represent of our own legislators. So, it would just be, let's urge people to let the legislature know what we think and what our values are. So, any other question about legislative update issues? Anyone else? No? Okay. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is administration and teacher recruitment hiring update. And I see Shelley Landgraf coming to the podium.
Yeah, I want to just do a brief set for this. So Shelley Landgraf, Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources. It's a busy season in HR, and long days, many days, most days of the week. So this is our hiring season. We're on the front end of that. One of the 5 priority areas, as you know, is the education pipeline in the strategic plan, and it has specific recommendations in it, and so you'll hear more about that a week from tonight. I just would say that under Shelley's leadership and others in our senior management team and our principals, we have actually been working on this for several years, really trying to refine our process and make sure that we are successful in the recruitment, selection, and retention of high-quality personnel, not just licensed personnel, but all personnel. So we asked Shelley if she would come this evening, and she included a document that Sandy sent out to you earlier, so it's in your board docs, that just gives a kind of a one-page overview of where we are. So, Shelley, if you would, please.
President Albright, members of the board,
Thank
you for having me here tonight. As Bruce said, I have a brief document just to share with you, really as it regards to our teacher and our administrator update so far. We have been very successful so far on our administrative hiring for building administrators. Majority of them are done, and we hope to be concluded by the end of the spring. We have changed our practice, and we communicated a little bit in the fall. Instead of doing interviews per building, what we decided to do is really do some in-depth discovery of our viable candidates, put them into one day with all schools there. For example, our elementary, we had 5 buildings all interviewing a very strong group of candidates. And throughout that process, each building really talked about the strengths and the characteristics that they enjoyed of those candidates. And then at the end of the day, they also interviewed with Bruce and Deirdre. And what was wonderful about that is all 5 schools were able to see our top candidates in one spot. So instead of doing 2 and 3 days where it's laborious for the candidate, it's tiring for the community, trying to get, having staff members having to take days off, getting substitute coverage, parents, community members to take that time off. We got it in one day. We were fortunate we had the cream of the crop for those 5. And it was remarkable how things just kind of landed out, where the characteristics, the personality, the needs of the schools really tuned in to those individual principal candidates. It was a tough decision for Sandy. She had the 5 in one day. We were aggressive, and we started with that as our first interview on February 27th. But it was a great decision for her to have. She really was able to dig deep into these candidates. She talked to them frequently, really trying to find the best fit for each school. A lot of thorough work on the front end, I would say, is one of the major changes we did this spring. We typically do references, initial references. Sandy and Mark and other hiring supervisors, look on paper. They do some initial reference checks. But we really went deeper this time. We did online live interviews for hire view, which means that Sandy and Mark and other hiring supervisors were actually able to watch a video from our department of talking to that candidate, whether they were in-state or out-of-state. After that, the hiring supervisor actually called the candidates or met them in person, once again an initial screening. So by the time they made recommendations to Bruce and Deirdre, they had been vetted through probably 5 different avenues of reference checks, conversations, multiple ways of looking at the candidates. Then they made the recommendation to Bruce and Deirdre. They put their lens on it, and then we brought forward a great pool of candidates. So I'm very proud of the work that our department has done. As Bruce said, it's a busy time of the season, and we have spent many, many more hours on the front end of our hiring season this year. But so far, with the exception of one, we have hired every single administrator on the first round of interviews, which we were not able to do that last year, part of it because of the timing and the circumstances. But I think when you can go through 10 principal hires right now, 8 at this point in time, and hire top quality candidates in the first round, I think that's pretty remarkable. So I just want to stop and do the administration first, and I'll talk about teachers in just a second. So if you have any questions.
Maybe not now.
Perfect.
Talk. Yeah. We may think of more.
Okay, that is perfect. So we also, part of our strategic initiative with the recruiting was to get our teacher postings out sooner. So we have released what we've identified as hard-to-fill positions, some of our intensive special ed programs, our bilingual programs, special service providers. We've gotten those out ahead of the game. We're working now closely with the schools to determine their openings. We have many, many applications. It's a matter of just, once again, trying to find the right candidate for the right position. So I believe we're in good shape for principal recruiting this season, and obviously I think we're also in good shape for our teacher recruiting. And we'll probably be 2 weeks ahead of what our time frame was last year for releasing all of our teaching assignments. Our goal is always that our buildings are filled before administrators leave for the summer.
Great.
Just add one comment. Shelley and I just had this conversation at the end of last week. There was an article in the Greeley Tribune recently. The University of Northern Colorado hosts a significant job fair every year that we participate in. And there's just a growing concern about, especially in secondary education and some of the hard-to-hire areas, that there's just aren't as many candidates, and certainly, consequently, not as many quality candidates. So, we believe we really need to be aggressive in our campaign to recruit, attract, be present. So we, as Shelley noted in her write-up, we are more actively involved in state job fairs, as well as ones we host here, and also we go out of state, because it's in some areas, especially not so much in elementary education, but in other areas we really have a shortage of high-quality candidates in the general candidate pool. So we think the practices that we've implemented, and we'll work more on this through the strategic plan to make sure that we can maintain a good pipeline of high-quality candidates for all of our positions. And tonight we're just focusing on licensed personnel.
Sam.
Shelley, I know because you told me earlier, we still use this Gallup survey instrument as part of the hiring process. Have we modified our approach to that at all since the initial implementation, or how does that work?
I don't know that we always say we've modified it. We use it as a resource, as an artifact, just as we look at the work experience, we look at transcripts, we look at their references, we have conversations. So it is a piece of evidence. I think it's information that's is not released to Anybody except for myself and Bruce and Deirdre and Rob Rankin, who's our director of recruiting. And so it's really just us to get another lens of those candidates. I think it's very valuable. It gives another insight. You know, for our AP positions, we had, I think, 267 people apply for our assistant principal positions. For, I think, 5 positions we have right now. So we need avenues to reduce that pool beyond just, you know, 1 or 2 criteria. So we try to expand that as much as possible, and Gallup is another insight that we can use to assist us with that.
Hey, Shelley?
So, you know, I've heard that before, that this is just an artifact that you use to round out the picture. But people have told me that it is the first hurdle. So which is it? Is it, do people have to get to a certain level before they can get further into the application process? Do they have to take that first? Or is it indeed just another point of data?
It's a point of data. I mean, so Gallup will say that there are ranges that the research shows it's more, you know, that those individuals have an opportunity to be more successful. But at the end of the day, it depends upon what that pool is. If, you know, so if we have, you know, for our hard-to-fill positions, if we have 13 individuals applying for a position, that is one indicator. We can't look just solely at Gallup. We're going to have to look at their work experience. If we're looking for an intensive program with that experience, that's going to hold a lot of weight. So when people, I would say, when people say it's the first hurdle, we don't release those scores. The principals have no idea, so they don't know what the hurdle is. So if they weren't put into the pool for that school, they don't know the reasons. The principals aren't told the reason, and sometimes it's they don't meet the qualifications. Sometimes the principals are looking for a certain experience within their background, what's on the job posting. So I think it's something that people attribute to why they weren't put in a pool, but it may not always be the contributing factor. Sometimes it is. Sometimes the transcripts are. Sometimes their work experience is. There's a multitude of factors of when we look at candidates, how we determine how to move people forward to buildings.
So that if a person gets a, quote, low score on this test, is there any way they would be considered
Certainly,
at that point?
certainly.
So it's not as if they take it, they get a score, and they don't move on?
As I tell candidates, there is not a pass-fail score on the Gallup. There is not a pass-fail on transcripts. There is not a pass-fail on work experience. It's a multitude of factors that we look at to determine what we believe is the best fit to move building, you know, to move forward to a building or a position.
So let me ask you, you know, I don't know how I randomly happened on this, but I saw where when the district was looking for a finance staff person, that they also had to take this test. Are we giving, it was part of the job?
The HireView they're required to take on certain positions. Hiring supervisor can request that HireView, which is the online screening, but not the Gallup. The Gallup is only
Okay.
the educational side.
Okay, that's good. So it seems like you're making modifications as you go along in this process to try and fine tune it so that you can get the best people. So we're going to be talking about this more with the strategic plan. So are there other ideas in the strategic plan in addition to these that we can't implement for some reason right now? Or what's going to be different when we talk about the strategic plan in this pipeline than what you're already doing here, which it sounds like you're doing a lot to improve the process?
Well, and the strategic plan focuses beyond teachers also. And so one of the things that we're looking at with strategic plan is ensuring, just as we've done for teachers and principals, is also to ensure our job descriptions and our evaluations and our professional development are all in line to attract and retain quality educators. So, you know, looking at job descriptions, looking at evaluations, looking at opportunities to provide to employees, that is part of the strategic plan for the attract, recruit, hire, and retain sections. Marketing, are we marketing to the correct areas? Bruce referred to the fact that, you know, we are recruiting more out of state. There just aren't the candidates in Colorado that there used to be, and so we're having to go out of state. So being strategic in regards to what states do we go to, what national conferences do we attend to try to retain, you know, try to recruit highly qualified teachers, administrators, whatever position it may be. So there is a long, you know, there's a long, you know, list in regards to strategic plan. It's, you know, it's very well organized in regards to years out, but it includes all educators. It's not just teachers and administrators.
Well, you know, it's interesting to me that all of a sudden we have a shortage of applicants when we just heard, you know, that we had hundreds for every position, which is why we had to put the Gallup survey in to
There's a
start
national
with.
shortage of young people coming into education. So for example, Denver Public Schools this spring is looking at hiring 500 teachers because the last generation of teachers that are in their 30 years, they're retiring, and people aren't filling in as much as those people are leaving. So it's a national shortage. We have over 5,000 teacher applications right now in Boulder. Are they all highly qualified? No. So it's not really, we have high quality, we have high quantity, but not in every position. There is a national trend that within 5 to 7 years, there will be a shortage in particular teaching areas. We're already seeing it in math and science on the high level areas of math and science.
And is that related to starting salaries or what?
Some research shows that it's the perception from the public of education, it's the starting salaries, it's people not wanting to go in education. But those are the two main ones that I've read on research, are the perception from the community and the salaries.
Thanks.
Tom?
So I have a follow-up question on the Gallup Teacher Insight tool. So a few years ago, when this was put into place, there was a lot of concern by community, teachers, parents about the validity of predicting teacher performance. And so one of the things this board was told back at that time is that we need to develop a little bit of history on it. So what history have we developed on the tool? And what data do we have to say it is or isn't a good predictor of a good teacher?
So a couple things that we have conducted thus far is we look at all of our probationary teachers, our first-year teachers, and we look at their scores. I mean, because only in our office, only myself and Rob Rankin have access to that. Melissa Ryberty. So we're reviewing the teacher with their Gallup score, and then this year, because of educator effectiveness, we're actually adding the educator effectiveness ratings for each standard. So we're starting to do some crosswalk of is a teacher effective, partially effective, highly effective? Do we see any type of connection with their Gallup? We're also looking at teachers that are non-renewed. Do we see a correlation there between, was it achievement drive? Was it relationships? Do we see a connection of when someone was not deemed successful in the district, can we make a connection to the Gallup? Right now, we're really just into year one because we're looking at the evaluation. We do have 3 years of data from Gallup in regards to our probationary teachers and how they, did they continue their contract? If they didn't, I talked to the administrator and just try to get my own informal conversation about what are we seeing of, why they weren't maybe as successful as we hoped they would be. So we are collecting data. I think what's going to be valuable to us is now that we have educator effectiveness and we actually have those 5 standards and overall rating, if we're deeming that someone is effective on educator effectiveness, how is that aligning with their Gallup Teacher Insight assessment?
Yeah, we've had obviously tonight a number of non-renewals on the agenda, and last year. So, obviously there are people not being renewed that pass some criteria associated with this
Most of those,
tool.
Tom, are limited term contracts. They were issued 1-year contracts.
Okay.
So those are the ones that they weren't, most of these are not performance related.
Okay, so the limited one term, did they go through the screening tool?
They all go through the screening, but they're limited term by nature. So, I mean, some of these are partial contracts or short years or half-time for a year. So, but to have a permanent job, they have to come back through for a permanent position. We do not extend limited term contracts forward. I mean, that's the nature of it. There's kind of 2 ways you come in the system.
So most of those on the list tonight are limited term.
Right, and we've reduced the overall number of non-renewals in the district in the last 3 to 5 years. So now some of them are performance related, and that's our expectation of principals. But limited terms, they're a 1-year contract basically, or a partial year contract in some cases.
Okay, thanks.
Our limited terms are people that take a leave of absence, a voluntary reduction.
Right.
So the FTE belongs to somebody else, and that's why it's a 1-year contract. Yes, they still take the Gallup, but in regards to the performance, they still have educator effectiveness. They still go through the same evaluation system. That way, if they do apply for a regular position, we still have that data to make a formal decision of whether or not we retain them.
Shelley?
So, I'm part of the Educator Effectiveness Committee, so I know how all that was done, and, it was all good work and very thoughtful work. But I think I've said before, I don't see in any way how our Educator Effectiveness tool can be used to validate the Gallup survey, because neither one of them are valid. So, I mean, our practices were not intended to be valid in the same way that, a test is valid. It's just what we came up with and decided was important for us, to see in our teachers. And I agree with all of that.
So I wouldn't say we're validating it, I would say it's a comparison. What I'm saying is that if someone is effective on educator effectiveness, when we look at their Gallup Insight Assessment, are they above average, average? Is there a correlation? I mean, do we see the same in there? Are they effective in educator effectiveness? And does Gallup and their research say that, yes, they will be a successful teacher? If there's a disconnect, that's what I want to look at. And I'm looking at them as separate, causes, but it's information that I think is relevant for me to look at is if we continue to have people, let's say, with very high insight scores, but we're continue to non-renewing them, we need to figure out why. Where is the disconnect? So I'm not validating either one. They're two separate things. It's like looking at transcripts also. If we put that third piece in there, which I look a lot at their undergraduate transcripts. What kind of course did they get, grades did they get? Is there a correlation with that?
Good, because one of the things that I'm really happy about with the strategic plan is that several of those 17 teams, which I know are no longer the teams anymore, but had described a practice of looking at best practices when they're designing what they're going to do going forward. So I just hope that we're looking at the Gallup survey again in this process as whether this is truly a best practice or not, because nothing I've read suggests that it is. So
and we'll continue to look at everything that we do. I mean, we want to make sure that everything we bring forward, because we are so fortunate that we have the choice to look at many, many candidates when we're hiring somebody. We want to make sure that when we make that recommendation for hire, we're using every valuable resource that we have to us in regards to best practices to make sure we're making a hiring practice that's the right one for the district.
So I would just encourage, if you would, Shelley and others, that when you receive the packet that we'll send to you that has the performance indicators or those areas of which we'll be measuring. So what you'll note there is in educator pipeline and other areas, but tonight we're talking about this area, is that doing that kind of analysis to see if our practices are predictive, as Shelley has described, and what other practices might be available to us to consider. So if you would, it isn't prescribing what we do, it's just saying to establish that. So take a look at that. I think that'll be particularly relevant given tonight's discussion when you look at that full sheet on the educator pipeline.
Jenny?
So thank you for your hard work on this. I've heard generally, the remarks I've heard about the principals that have been hired in the schools I'm aware of have been really positive. So that's encouraging and certainly better than hiring interim after interim after interim,
yes,
as we did last year. So I'm curious about the recruitment of and maybe retention, well, not maybe, but definitely the recruitment and retention of minority staff, and how we're doing on that.
It has been it's been a part of the strategic plan in regards to some of our actions. It's also been an initiative that we've had in the district since I've been here. The thing that is difficult with recruiting is that all districts are attracted to the same candidates, whether it's someone in an intensive needs that has experience, or it's the diversity section, and so it's very competitive, and the numbers are continuing to shrink. We've worked with Colorado University, and their numbers continue to decline in the education field for students of color. And so when you're looking at a smaller field in regards to viable candidates, then we have to figure out what attracts and what retains candidates. When you go out of state, you have to be leery because we used to go down, and I've traveled many times to New Mexico and Texas, and it's a great place to go for diversity. However, it's very difficult because a lot of the students there don't want to leave home for a long time. They may come up for a year, and then they decide they want to go back home. So you really have to be strategic when you go out of state for recruiting. Some districts look at programs within their district to recruit within seniors and try to work out programs through the universities. Broomfield High used to have a program, a teacher cadet program. Not a lot of diversity in that program, but we want to continue to explore. Some districts look at paraeducators, and so there are different avenues beyond just who comes out of the universities. A lot of people are looking at kind of what you call the grow your own mentality to try to get the diversity within our recruiting applicant pools, because it's not very large in its own self, in the state and the nation, let alone within Boulder. So, but it's a goal that we continue. It's a priority. I was just at Columbine Elementary today, and it's wonderful when you're walking around the building and, you know, you're seeing so much diversity in the building. It really makes a difference for those kids. And so it's a goal we definitely have. Us and every single district in the state, you know, has the same goal. And that's what helps us with, you know, with our salary and our professional learning and our tuition reimbursements and our induction program. And we have so many incentives that we can sell to candidates when we're trying to recruit them. It helps us immensely when we're out on the road.
Sure. Shelley? Yeah.
So I don't know if anyone else is interested in this, but I would like to meet some of our new principals. So I'm wondering if it's possible to have some sort of reception or something where we get to
Yeah,
meet
in the
them.
fall, that'd be great. I
Yep.
mean, obviously, they don't start until the end of July, so
Right.
we could make maybe one of our early fall meetings. We could invite them to come.
Great.
And maybe a before meeting, we could serve some nice refreshments, and I would include probably all of our administrative staff and others if you'd like. So that'd be great.
Good idea,
Be
Shelley.
like a little celebration. So great, folks. As I shared with some of you last week, we have been very pleased with experienced teachers and administrators that want to work for Boulder Valley School District for a variety of reasons, including our compensation plan, but a lot of other things under your leadership that we're doing in this district that makes a difference for students, and they want to be in a place where they feel like they're making a meaningful difference, and I think they believe that's here, and we believe it is as well. So anyway, and the hard work of our HR team and many others, our principals that go to these job fairs with us, and so Tina works, Mew works alongside us with us, so yeah, that'd be great to celebrate our success around our personnel selection. Thank you. And Shelley, thank you for your
Thank you.
leadership and your hard
One-
work.
I've got one quick question. How many, I mean, just approximately, I know that it's early days yet, how many teachers do we think we're going to be hiring for next year?
We typically hire what I would refer to as new hires would be 150 to 185. Some positions will be, as you know, Tom talked about, limited term, you know, so what I call new would be about 150 to 185, somewhere in there.
Okay, thank you.
I might remind you that under the new contract 3 years ago, extended the length of the contract for our new educators to the system. So part of the new educator orientation and transition has been in place since that. So it's a chance for Shelley and her team and others to work to welcome. So we're usually a part of the welcome, to welcome them and help set the stage so they enter and have early success with us. And we're going to do the same thing for our new principal hires this year going forward, to give them the opportunity to get to know us a little bit better before they're so busy they can't look up. So anyway, that's a positive thing that you approved in the last contract. Thank you. Thank you, Shelley.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Nice. Good, solid update. Okay, the next item on our agenda is action items consent copy, and I'll read them. 8.1, personnel items. 8.2, approval of minutes, March 10th, 2015, regular meeting. 8.3, approval of minutes, March 17th, 2015, special meeting. 8.4, acceptance of donation from Aspen Creek K-8. 8.5, acceptance of donation from Boulder High School. 8.6, acceptance of employees' symptom survey as recommended by the Colorado Department of Public Health. 8.7, approval of award of consultant agreement for independent audit services. 8.8, award of contract for educational innovation consultant services. 8.9, district unified improvement plan. 8.10, network bandwidth and next generation security improvements. 8.11, non-renewal of contracts. 8.12, resolution 15-06, restoring the negative factor before providing TABOR refunds as a statewide priority. 8.13, update of board resolution number 9-26, purchasing dollar thresholds for bond program projects. 8.14, grant, school health services, school-based health centers, planning grant, Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. 15. 8.15, grant, special education, School to Work Alliance Program, Colorado Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. 8.16, grant, instructional services, equity, BVSD moves, Kaiser Permanente, 2015. 8.17, grant, information technology, 21st Century Cohort, Google Incorporated, and Tides Foundation. And that's it.
Long list. Thank you.
That was all. It was all. We're busy. We're doing a lot of stuff. It's springtime. Is there a motion to approve? Jenny, second. Sam. Are there any items that anyone would like to have pulled? Pulled or question? Okay.
I want to pull the school health services.
Okay, 8.14, okay. 8.14 has been pulled, and we'll discuss it later under action items. Are there other items to be pulled? Seeing none. Are there any items that board members have questions about? Tom?
Yeah, so 8.6, which is the symptom survey recommendation. Our board motion on the March 10th asked for Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment to bring forth a recommendation for the survey, symptom survey. So, so this is, I think, an excerpt right out of that recommendation letter we got from Dr. Mike Van Dyke. The question is, there is a statement about when it should start, 2 weeks after spring break, and when all the ventilation system and building repairs have been completed. So the question is, have all those been completed, ventilation and building repairs? Are we ready to start it now?
Yeah, I think we're very close, Tom. I would want to confirm that, but I think given the briefing I was given today and I reported earlier, I think they're targeting next week. And so that would indicate to me that Mike, Dr. Van Dyke, is comfortable that he wanted to get that stabilized, and so I think they're there, is my sense. And so part of what this will involve, because it's, as you recall, administered multiple times, is working with Justin McMillan, the principal, and the staff to set up the time to do it. It's going to be an online survey, so they want to introduce it appropriately and constructively, because as Dr. Van Dyke indicated in his presentation on April 2nd, is that we want a high participation level, not just the first time, but each time, because that will give them the data they need to make recommendations or decisions. So I'm thinking, Tom, what I understand will be next week is their
So
plan.
we'll start next week. And
That's what I understand. Then,
you know how long that process will take, or what?
well,
he's outlined?
I don't know the length of the actual administration of the survey, but what I heard Justin mention, I don't know if this will work, is they might try to just dedicate a time where they just go to the computer lab, and so people don't have to figure out where to get it in their workday, and then those who can't, obviously they could do it another time. But they'll have probably, they'll log in and do that.
Have
So
a
I don't
window
know
of
the
time.
administration, but I mean, generally surveys would be, less than an hour. But I'm hoping it's not quite that long either, so that we can have high participation rate. But I'm thinking next week.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Shelley?
I have a question about, what is it? 8.8, the award of the contract for educational innovation consultant. It looks like that contract's about $250,000 or $260,000, I can't remember exactly, but I'm just wondering, is that just an initial installment on hiring these architects? Because it sounds like from this piece of it, that what they'll be doing is sort of coming up with some ideas and working with a secondary architect that we find to sort of leverage their work, it sounds like. So I'm just wondering, is this the end of Fielding Nair, or is it just the first round of Fielding Nair, this particular proposal?
It reflects their proposal of what they've asked. We had a WebEx, a conference video call with Prakash and his team today, and are planning for what we'll do yet this spring. So I would say if we stay within the scope of the work that he's presented in response to our request for proposal, then this captures it. I mean, clearly. And there's opportunities, there will be with any of these contracts if we see need to expand or do additional work, and he's given us costs associated with doing that, so his proposal is very clear on that. So I would say today, yes, Shelley. And this is a different process than we've used with this design process on the front end. So we're very excited, looking forward to working with Prakash Nair and his team. Obviously, we were impressed when they did their presentation and their proposal, and they'll do a visioning session with our building level folks. And so sometime, once we get our bearings on the timeline and the work, I think it'd be really helpful for us to either invite you to a presentation that you could just come if your schedule's allowed, or if it's appropriate, we can coordinate the times, maybe they could come here and address the board. I think it would be helpful for you to see kind of the vision of the work they've done nationally and internationally that we've been introduced to. I think you'd find that interesting, as will our community, and then obviously much greater detail when they get into the school teams and doing that work. But yeah, initially, yes.
Yeah, I've actually looked at their website quite a bit, and I actually read the book that the Summit principal gave me, that I guess one of them wrote.
Yeah.
I don't know. So, the work they do is very interesting. I'm just wondering, you know, and I can see why the district would be interested in working with them. I'm just wondering, did anyone else even come close in terms of the, you know, the range of creativity and value that they offered? Like, how many other bids do we get? And
We had received several. There were two finalists. Frank Locker and Nick Salmon were the other competition. Frank, was introduced to us. We introduced ourselves to Frank a couple of years ago. He did a session with our leadership. Be 2 years this August, I believe, and he's out of Boston, and his associate Nick Salmon's out of Missoula, Montana. They've had great interest in us, and these firms compete against each other quite a bit, and sometimes work together on projects. So obviously they were disappointed that they didn't get this work, but yeah, those were the two finalists that I would say were very competitive, and you know, they just bring a little something different to the table, and we just thought where we were. But I would just have to say we probably would have done well with either of the two finalists, but you have to pick one, and so we were pleased with both of their proposals and their presentations.
okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I had a question on the contract of this same issue that we're talking about, the consultant agreement on innovation, about the term, and I think you addressed it, but I just may not have heard it clearly. It says the term, the time period to be covered shall begin now, essentially, or the date the parties execute this agreement, and shall continue through the successful completion of the services. And so the services are the whole planning work that we're talking about. Is that right?
Yeah.
And
That
how
they'll
do
be-
we
that they'll be
conclude?
involved in.
Pardon me?
Yes, that they'll be involved in.
Okay. Well, it just feels open-ended to me.
By design, because I think that it's really to Shelley's question. I mean, we'll start with our phase one schools and we'll do some visioning activities. The work that the decisions, I guess, we're making right now and working with Prakash and his team and our own team is if you're a phase 3 school, they don't even know who they are yet, but they're out there a ways. You know, we want to introduce this work to everyone when we start, but there'll be some relevance that will be more relevant, items that will be more relevant if, 4 years from now for some schools. So we need to judge that, and so we want it flexible and open-ended, and we recognize that if we go beyond what the original scope of work calls for, there will be costs associated with that. So I just think, Lori, we don't know today until we get a little further down the path. We're going to meet with them later this month and do a planning session with senior management in our district with their team. They're coming in, and I think the product of that day will be to have a better sense of that timeline and who's involved and what role they'll play, and some of this, so we're in the process of selecting an innovation director that will be paid for out of the bond. That'll be an administrator for BVSD who will work closely with this firm and will lead a lot of that work internally. And so we think we've made an offer, we've got an acceptance, we think we've got a really high-quality individual who's going to join us, a Colorado educator, and so that individual will be immersed in this. This work will also be in part under the leadership of the Assistant Superintendent for Strategic Initiatives, which will be a replacement position when Dr. Pelch leaves this spring. And so we're working to design all this so that it's very complementary to our strategic planning process. But we'll have a better sense once we get a little further down the path as to the timeline and the scope of we have a pretty good sense of the scope of the work. We're just not quite sure today how that's going to play out in the timeline.
Okay. Board members, any other questions or comments? Tom? Mm-hmm.
So on, let's see, the 813, which is the updated board resolution 0926, I guess that was 2009, purchasing dollar threshold for bond program projects. A few questions. As I was reading through this, there are 3 resolutions there that are referenced that I haven't seen any of those and don't have a recollection of those. I think most of the people on this board weren't even on the board at that time, one back from 08. There's also a policy that is referred to here that no longer exists, and there's some terminology that I'm not familiar with. So what I need here is more background on this as to what it is, why we need it, what the rationale is, and so I can understand it.
Leslie, do you have, Don?
So Tom, we have set thresholds currently
on any type of purchasing done by the district. The intent behind this resolution is to increase those for the purpose of implementation of the bond. So it gives us a little bit more flexibility in approving contracts, awards at these different thresholds. So oftentimes a project will come in with a change order, for instance, or additional services that are required, and we don't have the luxury of waiting till the board meets to bring those forward to you. So we're increasing those thresholds. The attachments shows you what other districts have done. So we work closely with our procurement department to match or be consistent with other districts as well.
Yeah, I guess I didn't see that in the attachment for what other districts are doing. I see this, this is a comparison. So this doesn't say other districts, this is our resolutions, right? That's our resolution in 2009 and our resolution amending that or updating that, right? So I don't see anything about other districts.
You're correct. Yeah, I guess I didn't make, I thought that was the attachment.
Okay.
That's what our procurement department surveyed peer districts, other metro districts to see what their thresholds were. I saw that document and I thought it was attached here.
Okay.
It isn't. But.
So, so the 0926 resolution, I assume that refers to the 2006 bond, what was done, is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
We had implemented similar thresholds with the previous bond program to meet the same needs. And this is just updating and sort of overriding that previous.
Okay, just for this bond, obviously,
Right.
right? For other things, we'll go back to the policy DJE, right, which is
This is
board
all-
approval for anything over 100,000, right?
Correct. This is only for bond-related projects, not
Okay,
for other.
and so,
It's the same amount as the last one.
it's the same amount as the last one, yeah, in that, the really only the changes that I see from the last time would be, I guess those are in red here. So I have a question, Chief Facilities Officer, who is that?
That's me.
That's you?
Yeah.
Okay, you got a new title?
New title.
It is.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't know that. So that's you, and Leslie then, I mean, not Leslie, but Bill now, right? I gotta get back on board here, right? I'm behind, so I apologize. So you guys would then have approval up to 100,000 without board approval, and superintendent would be up to 250,000, right, without board approval. Then anything over 250,000 would have to come to the board through so do I have that straight? Is that correct?
Correct. And the thresholds for going through a process remain the same. So there's no changing of the requirements
Right.
for an RFP, say.
Right.
at 50,000.
Sealed bids or whatever it might be, right.
We still go through all those same process. This is just for the signature authority.
Okay. All right, thank you. I was, just need more information.
Anyone else? Okay, well, then seeing no other discussions, Sandy, will you please call the vote?
Albright?
Yes?
Belville?
Yes.
Benford?
Yes.
Fuqua?
Yes.
Marquis?
Yes.
Myers?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, so the next item on our agenda is action items, which would include items pulled from the consent grouping, which would be 8.6, is that right?
8.14. 8.14.
8.14, the
8.14,
grant from the School Health Services School-Based Health Centers Planning Grant from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Is there a motion to approve? Jenny, is there a second? Sam? Okay, discussion.
Yeah, so this isn't a big grant. This is just $25,000. And it doesn't require any school, like, matching funds or anything. But the concern I have about it is that school-based health centers, they're actually pretty controversial. And I feel like the board needs to discuss this before we just approve it. And so I would just like to table it and maybe bring it forward as an information item to explain exactly what the district has in mind. And, you know, I know this is just a motion or a proposal to study it, but, you know, studying something requires resources, and it suggests that there's a possible path. And, you know, it's with everything on our plate right now, and it looks like very little money to do it. I'm just not sure that without some discussion, you know, the board wants to go down this path. I just want more information about what that means. So I would recommend tabling it or bringing it forth as an information item at a future meeting.
Before we even study it?
Before we even study it?
Before we go, okay. Before we approve this grant
Yeah,
to.
yeah, before we move ahead, just let's find out what the end goal here is.
So, President Albright, I just want to make sure, and I know Shelley knows this because we've had the conversation. This is a grant to study. And so, I mean, some of the information and implementation of such a program would be a big deal because that would require, you know, some sort of support by the board and investment. This is a study and exploration grant that we would be, we have been working on this actually. This would be a continuation of that so that we can gather the data, the information that we think would be relevant and whether it's even appropriate for BBSC to be involved anymore or consider this as an option. And clearly that would be a more, you know, detailed report and a more, but we really, I mean, we can share with you literature about school-based clinics. We just haven't conducted the internal review of this and the feasibility for BVSD, so we won't have that information. That's the purpose of this grant, is to engage in that work. So I just want to make clear what this is and what it's not. I mean, clearly we would not proceed with implementing such a program on the Arapahoe campus or any other campus until such time as we bring it to the board. This is really, as I stated, a study grant. So I just want to make it clear that if we bring it back as a future study item and an action item, there probably isn't a lot of additional information to share with you other than what's included in this item because we're in the exploratory phase of it. If the board doesn't want us to participate in an exploratory phase at all, then I would suggest you don't support this. If you're interested in supporting us exploring this to bring back a report after we finish that study and exploration, then these would be resources that would be helpful to do us. I just want to give context for what this actually is.
And I would just reiterate, I just don't think we should be doing this until we know more about it. And I'm not talking about the kind of level of detail of knowledge that you would get from a $25,000 investment in that. I'm talking about some basic understanding of what is intended by doing this, what the controversies are around it. I don't think anyone on this board really understands what this means, I mean, unless they've researched it already. So all I'm asking is that we wait and bring it forward as an information item and that we all have a chance to think about it before we actually go down a path of distraction here when we need to be focused on what we can do with the little money that we have at this point.
I'm going to disagree with you. I would like this information to be able to have that discussion, and I think this isn't our money. This is $25,000 coming from the State Health Department.
Right, but it will, I mean, we will be using school resources to answer these questions.
Sure.
So, I mean, it's going to require, you know, that people be taken off their job to answer
Right.
these questions.
But I think I would prefer to wait till we have that information to have the discussion. That's just where I'm at with it.
Yeah.
So if we don't act tonight, it's gone.
Well, I would prefer not to go down this path until we know more what we're doing, so.
This is what will tell us more, I
This
believe.
will tell us in more detail than I think we need to know. I'm talking about a general discussion about why some districts don't want school-based health centers and why some do, and what the advantages and disadvantages of are doing that in a general sense, not where would we put one, which is what this is, you know, partially about. Where would we put it? Like what building, like, you know, I don't even want to go there until the board agrees this is something we want to do. So,
I see needs assessment as part of the planning process, so we'll be assessing the need with this grant, and it may tell us we don't need one. I'd like to know that before we spend time talking about it. I'd like to gather the information that this planning process will gather before I will feel informed enough to even discuss it generally.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Sam, but it's not a need or a not need, it's a choice. And so the question is, do we want to make that choice? Because, you know, there are reasons to do it and there are reasons not to do it. And so we need to know what those generally are before I believe we take the step. This is a step. This is a distraction. It's taking some teachers and staff off of what they're doing to do this. And all I'm asking is that we have one information, you know, item on this. I'm not asking for a 3-year delay or anything. I'm asking for just a little more information before we go ahead with this. That's all.
Anyone else? Tom?
Yeah, you know, I've mentioned this a couple of times that, you know, there's thousands of things that we could do. We don't have the staff, nor would we want to do thousands of good things or potentially good things. We need to concentrate on the things that will give us the most bang for our resources. And again, I would like to know, is this the direction that we're considering on? We've got a director of health services here, a school Medicaid coordinator, and a Arapahoe campus principal that will need to do this work. And, you know, I think there's a lot of stuff that they need to do that this would distract their time until we know a little bit more about where we're going. So, you know, I would like to find out more about before we commit to taking up their time.
Okay. Jenny, do you have any comments or questions? And
No, I will support this grant because I think that'll help us figure out whether this is a good direction to go down.
I'm going to support this too. I just think it's real important to deal with the health issues of particularly low-income children in high-poverty schools, and I think this will give us some information about this. It's not a promise to move forward, but I think it is an important step. And I realize that every time we ask an individual on our staff to do something, but in this case, it's for kids' health and in high-poverty situations, and I just think it's important that we go ahead.
Just, can I
So,
add
go
something
ahead,
to-
please.
You know, I don't want anyone to believe that our high-poverty children are not getting services now. It's not like they're not getting services and this is going to supply the services. It's just a different method of supplying those services.
Right.
So I don't think we should, you know, get into this, you know, belief that somehow we're not doing something we should be doing for these kids, because that's just not true. That's not what this is about. So.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, no others. Let's see, the motion will be to approve this grant, this 8.14 grant with school health services. Sandy, and I didn't see Tina leave.
I saw her leave. I don't know why she left.
Yeah, okay. Sandy, will you call the vote?
Albright.
Yes?
Belleville.
Yes.
Benford.
No.
Fuqua.
Yes.
Marquis. It's not here. Myers.
No.
Motion passes.
Okay. The next item on our agenda is agenda setting. Are there any comments? Let's see.
Yes, I would like to put the athletic discussion on the agenda as a, I don't know, as a what? As an information item or a work session to discuss this?
Okay.
I'm not sure what the best format would be.
So probably what would be helpful would be what are the questions, you know, so that we can be focused
Right.
when we talk about it at agenda setting, to try to think about what the issues are and.
Yeah, you email those to me. I'll have them ready for for the agenda setting session. If you have questions or topics you'd like addressed in that work session or information, just email them to me. I'd be glad to bring them to agenda setting.
Are you going to copy, there was a copy of the speaker's remarks?
Yeah,
it's
Sandy will get it to you.
attached, and if we get that might.
Okay. Anything else?
This doesn't have to be long, but I'm just thinking as we're heading into the summer, I would appreciate some kind of informational overview of our various summer programs. Whether it's the extended year things we do, the summer schools, the summer reading, the partnerships. I don't want it to be very labor intensive, and it could just be an RFI or an information item that comes to this body during one of our regular meetings, but an overview of what we have planned for this summer. Does that make sense? Did you get that?
To me?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure.
So the other thing that we've sometimes done that might be helpful with that is we've occasionally had tours of our summer school programs, and I think that would be a good supplement to what Sam is asking for. I always, the ones I've been on, I have enjoyed.
Yeah, we've done that every year I've been here.
Okay, any other suggestions? Tom?
Yeah, related to the discussion we just had over this, school health services. It says the Department of Public Health makes grants to school districts and public health departments to plan and establish school-based health centers. So that's what this grant is about, to plan and establish. I want to know what that's all about, like, Shelley was talking about. I know nothing about this program. I know nothing about who's done it or what's the past or what the implications are. And this grant was just approved to plan and establish. So I think we need an agenda item on what this is about.
I would offer that we could probably provide some of that in writing from those individuals who have been involved in this work so far, and maybe that would be a start. And then if there's a desire to have additional conversation, we certainly could schedule it as an item. But our principal at Arapahoe, several people have been very involved in this, so we could certainly bring that information together and work with the consultant, at least provide some background information. So I'll follow up with that, and maybe that'd be a starting point.
See, okay.
Shelley?
See, that comment, it concerns me. I mean, why are people really involved with this already when we haven't even discussed it as a board? Like, why is that happening? Like, shouldn't that be a conversation here before we go down that path?
I would just say, Shelley, we're involved in probably thousands of things every day, in conversations in schools and planning and anticipation, and part of exploring and dreaming and thinking about possibilities. As we shared with you in the agenda setting session, this is a part of the potential career pathway for health professions. And so our Career and Tech Ed Center, which is in the Arapahoe campus, that's appropriate to align that discussion. So, I mean, we don't bring every idea forward that we're talking about in the district, but when it materializes into something that's significant or needs board action or requires board approval, it comes to the boardroom. So, I mean, this has been an area of interest for our staff, and so they pursued this grant application to do study on it. So, I mean, that's why it came before the board.
Well, I certainly understand that there are many things the board does not need to be involved in, nor does it want to. But as I said, this is a fairly big thing to be discussing, and it's fairly controversial. So I think that the district should acknowledge that when something's potentially controversial, the board should be involved early on it. So.
Any other items for agenda setting? Well, I will just say I regret that I will not be here at the meeting next week, as I've already said. But I will send in a note about my thoughts for the budget issues, which will include, I'll just say what one of them is now. I've been very concerned about the cuts that have been made to the schools, and we have discussed earlier restoring and backfilling those 2.25% to deal with the class size and some of the programming issues, and making sure that the kids in schools have the opportunity. So that will be something that I will be interested in suggesting that is included in our next budget. So, sorry I won't be here to make it in person. But. Is there any other discussion? All right. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all.